morning, everyone. I'd like to invite everyone to take their seats. Welcome. My name is Dr. Karen Austrian. I'm the director of the Girls Center here at Population Council. And we want to welcome everyone here. Thank you for coming. We know there is a wide array of events going on this CSW week, so we're really excited to have everyone here. And the Girls Center, together with the Cash Transfer and IPV Research Collaborative, UNICEF, are really happy to be co-hosting this event, and we welcome you here. So to start us off, I'd like to introduce Pat Vaughn, who is the interim co-president and general counsel of Population Council, to speak and welcome her.
I have some height challenges, so I'm going to have to stand on something. That's tall. All right, so good morning, everyone, and I want to extend a warm and enthusiastic welcome to everyone here, because I know we're all advocates for adolescent growth. So welcome, welcome, welcome. I want to acknowledge the presence of a few key representatives here today from the government of Zambia, Mr. Caputo. We also have representatives from the UN, including UNICEF. So Lauren White. Oh, hi, Lauren. From FCDO, Rachel Mason. Rachel. And our partner from Cash Transfer and IPV Research Collaborative, Tia Palermo. Yeah. Okay, so CSW 68 is happening at a time when the world is at a critical intersection of gender equality. Globally, 10.3% of women live in extreme poverty, and yet progress towards ending poverty needs to be 26 times faster to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. The Population Council, with evidence generated over the past 70+ years, is a way to the urgent need to accelerate the empowerment of girls and women. And we are transforming global thinking on investments for the well-being of adolescent girls. We acknowledge the numerous gender challenges that hinder adolescent girls' ability to thrive and reach their full potential. From lack of access to education and healthcare, to gender-based violence and early marriage, the barriers they encounter are multifaceted and complex. At this CSW 68, we're standing in solidarity with adolescent girls empowerment. We are showing up for girls by shifting the conversation on 3 key principles. First, the power of investing in girls when it counts. Our evidence has shown that it is important to reach adolescent girls when they are young, between the ages of 10 and 14, before irreversible events like early and/or unintended pregnancy can anchor them in poverty. When girls are reached in early adolescence, prior to negative outcomes setting in, they can be set on a more positive life trajectory. For example, our Adolescent Girls Initiative Kenya has reached more than 6,000 girls between ages 11 to 15 over 2 years. We have tested layered packages of interventions that address violence prevention with interventions on education, health, and wealth creation. The findings point to not just the importance of early intervention, but holistic interventions for girls, which is our second call to action. Adolescents as whole beings. We acknowledge, and our evidence points to this, that girls cannot thrive if we focus on one aspect of their empowerment. We need to view the girl as a whole. As we will see from some of the case studies today, having holistic investments includes addressing high levels of poverty which girls live in through social protection and cash transfers, and layering that with other investments such as training and empowerment. The approach has the potential to turn the tide for adolescent girls by allowing families to invest in their economic empowerment, health and education, and increasing the overall quality of adolescent girls' lives. Also, there's power in collaboration and having adolescents at the front and center of our work. Adolescent girls are at the heart of our collective future. There is power in working together and pulling our weight behind their success and not working in silence. We are grateful that today we have many stakeholder voices in the room. Each and every one of you standing in solidarity with adolescent girls. We are proud of the Council's Girls Center for leading this collective action through this convening and other girl-centered events at CSW 68 for a stronger community working with and for adolescent girls while enabling them to be in the lead and challenging the status quo. Let us continue to reaffirm our collective commitment to protecting and empowering adolescent girls everywhere. We have the power to harness our expertise and evidence to demand better and more inclusive, holistic investments for adolescent girls to thrive. We appreciate the team that has put together this event, Population Council Girls Center, Communications Team, our partners at UNICEF, Cash Transfer, and IP Research Collaborative. We extend our appreciation to each and every one of you for being here today and participating in this very important meeting.
Thank you, Pat. So just to give a quick overview of this morning's event, so we will have 3 presentations, one offering an overview of some of the research and literature around social protection and adolescent girls, and then 2 case studies, one from Kenya and one from Zambia, around of particular social protection or cash plus programs focused on adolescent girls. And then we will have a panel with some questions from panelists, a chance for the audience to ask questions, and then we will wrap it up. You're welcome to stay after and have some more conversations. So I want to introduce 2 out of the 3 speakers. I'm not going to introduce myself, that's awkward. So we have Dr. Tia Palermo, who is the president of Policy Research Solutions, or otherwise known as PRESTO, and an associate professor at the University of Buffalo. Her research examines impacts of social protection and economic empowerment programming on health, gender-based violence, and other dimensions of well-being. Dr. Palermo has experience providing technical assistance to UN agencies, governments, bilateral donors, and governments implementing social protection programming. She holds a PhD in public policy and a Master of Science in Economics. Welcome to you. And then we also have Mr. Lily Chisapa Caputo, who is the National Coordinator for the Keeping Girls in School initiative within the Ministry of Education and the Government of Zambia. This program is under the World Bank-sponsored Girls, Education, and Women Empowerment and Livelihoods Project, otherwise known as JEWEL. Mr. Caputo is a Zambian national with over 16 years of experience in planning, budgeting, project management, and policy development, with a focus on education, gender, social protection, public safety and order, as well as tourism. In the past 16 years, he has worked in the Ministry of Home Affairs and the Planning Department, and headed the Planning and Information Department in the Ministry of Gender, as well as the Ministry of Tourism in Zambia. He's also worked in the Office of the Vice President as an expert in parliamentary matters for social sector ministries, including education, health, community development, and gender. He's trained in economics and project management. Welcome. We're really looking forward to what you have to say today. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Tia to present her systematic review.
Thank you everyone for being here this morning. Thank you to Karen for the introductions. Today what I'm going to do is give a little bit of an overview on social protection and adolescence, and then you're going to hear a deeper dive from our colleagues, Dr. Austrian and Mr. Caputo, about some of the more specific programs, particularly in Kenya and Zambia. So from a social perspective, or social protection perspective, why should people working in this area care about gender and adolescence? Well, first and foremost, sustainable poverty reduction cannot be achieved without addressing gender inequities. In terms of adolescence, discriminatory gender norms drive gender gaps in development for adolescents. So for example, adolescents both face greater vulnerabilities, but often have fewer coping strategies to deal with those vulnerabilities. In adolescence, gender inequities shape both social as well as economic risks, and laws, norms, and practices just put girls' investments in health and education at its disadvantage. At the same time, social and reproductive vulnerabilities intersect in this time period, and adolescent girls face risks such as early pregnancy, early marriage, which can also interrupt their schooling and have implications for their productive future into adulthood. And because of this, adolescence is a time when we can invest, help interrupt that intergenerational persistence of poverty. Therefore, there is a growing demand, as seen by all of us here at CSW this week, to understand how social protection can contribute to gender equality outcomes, including among adolescents. Social protection in adolescence can promote empowerment and enhance capabilities. However, social protection coverage rates are lowest among children and adolescents as compared to other age groups. So for example, if we look at social protection coverage globally, about 47% of the global population is covered by at least one social protection benefit. If we look at children and adolescents, it's only 26%. And that's compared to about 77% of older persons. So despite all of these reasons that we should be investing in adolescents, they have among the lowest coverage globally in terms of age groups for social protection coverage. Now, another important aspect of adolescence is that this is when gender norms and gender attitudes are solidified. And so as Dr. Austrian mentioned, it's very important to intervene in this age range. So when we talk about social protection, this can be largely broken down into non-contributory and contributory programming. So with contributory programming, people need to pay into the system to then be able to access benefits such as health insurance, unemployment insurance, maternity benefits when they need those. On the other hand, non-contributory programming includes social assistance programs and social care programs. So the latter include things like family support and home-based care, whereas social assistance programs include things like cash transfers, which we're going to hear more about today, public works programs, and fee waivers and subsidies. So with some colleagues from UNICEF and Adolescent, we conducted a review of non-contributory social protection programs in terms of coverage, adolescent sensitivity, as well as impacts of these programs. And what we saw is that these programs are rarely targeted directly to adolescents or households with adolescents in them as a category. And when they are, they tend to be focused on children and adolescents up to age 14. So that older adolescent age range where a lot of these vulnerabilities really start to intersect, and there's risks related to pregnancy, marriage, and dropping out of school. Adolescents and households with adolescents, there aren't a lot of programs targeted to them. So, and you can see that with the orange bar. So the orange bar is programs that are targeted to children up until 14 years, whereas the purple and the green are for older adolescents. So we see that globally, there are very few social protection programs which are targeted to or focused on households with adolescents. But as I mentioned earlier, this age group, this generation, is key to stemming that intergenerational transfer of poverty. And that's because adolescents, their investments in education are going to determine their safe transitions to adulthood, their productive potential, and also vulnerabilities such as, for example, nutrition. So if adolescents are malnourished and then they're having the next generation of children, there are intergenerational implications for both poverty, malnutrition, and other risk factors. So when we try to integrate adolescent sensitive and gender responsive programming into social protection, what does that look like? Well, we can think about it at the design phase, the implementation phase, as well as the evaluation phase. So in the design phase, social protection programming can be targeted to households with adolescents or targeted directly to women. It can also be made unconditional to alleviate time burdens and time poverty. So women and adolescent girls shoulder a disproportionate proportion of unpaid care burdens. And by making cash transfer programs in particular unconditional, it can help alleviate some of those unpaid care burdens and help address gender inequities. Delivery and payment mechanisms can also be made gender sensitive in terms not only of targeting women, but making sure they're actually able to access payments through financial inclusion, ownership of cell phones, access to cell phones, and payment mechanisms. In addition, and importantly, what we're going to hear a lot about today is cash plus and integrated social protection programming. And what that looks like in practice often is linkages to either complementary programming layered on top of basic social protection programs such as cash transfers, linkages to other services. One example is health insurance. So cash transfer recipients targeted by government programs can then be linked to fee waivers for enrollment into health insurance schemes. Or they can be linked to other existing services such as vocational training, health insurance, that are either implemented by government or partners. From the implementation side, it's very important that programs are implemented with fidelity to their design. So what I mean by that is when these gender sensitive or gender responsive components are designed at the national level, it's important to communicate the objectives of why these programs are being designed in such a way. So for example, the communication about the objectives and the design components need to be communicated at the regional, the district, and the local levels so that they are implemented in a way that is gender responsive. For example, if women who are pregnant or lactating are exempt from public works components, it's important that people understand why, so that they're not continuing to require that women participate in these programs while pregnant or breastfeeding. So these gender-aware operational features can be implemented. So another example of that would be public works programs. If they're being implemented in communities, women can be brought on board to help talk about what types of programs are implemented. For example, they can help alleviate burdens related to access to water and fuel sources. Then on the evaluation side, both for monitoring and evaluation, but also for impact evaluations, it's important that we're measuring outcomes related to gender equality. So whether that's intimate violence, women's empowerment, agency, decision-making, these types of outcomes need to be integrated into evaluations. And in terms of M&E and impact evaluations, we need age and sex disaggregated analysis. Cost effectiveness analysis can also show how some of these programs operating at scale might be more cost effective in achieving some of these gender equality outcomes than very siloed specific programming, which might be more cost and time intensive to implement. So when we looked at that umbrella of social protection programs, what do some of these programs look like in practice when they're adolescent sensitive or gender responsive? So we're going to hear more about the Jewel program in Zambia and the AGI program in Kenya from other panelists today. India also has a cash transfer program, which was aimed at promoting immunization, education, and delayed marriage among adolescent girls. In Tanzania, there was a pilot program through the government's flagship social protection program called Ujana. The pilot was called Ujana Salama, which provided adolescents living in government cash transfer households with additional livelihoods and life skill training, mentoring, linkages to adolescent-friendly services, and a productive grant. This has also since been scaled up to a couple other regions. And then one example is Mozambique, where there was a cash plus care grant, which combined cash with community-based case management. Social insurance, so countries like Morocco have made advances in universal health coverage, which can help address inequities in access to care for women and girls. And then also some examples of programming for job training can be examples of labor market policies. So in the overview that we did, looking at mapping social protection coverage and impacts, we looked at impacts of a range of different outcomes. Now, social protection primarily is aimed at addressing poverty and food insecurity. But because poverty is a driver of a lot of adverse outcomes in adolescence, social protection programs can also have secondary protective effects on a lot of gender equality related outcomes. And so what we see, so this is a mapping of only government-run non-contributory social protection programs. So there are other examples out there not covered in this review because they were not implemented by government. And so what we see is that programs are successful in improving school enrollment, attendance, food security, health service utilization, and fewer than half, but still some programs are also successful in improving mental health as well as schooling attainment or achievement. When we look at sexual and reproductive health related outcomes among adolescents, we see that programs are able to delay sexual debut, reduce age disparate sex, and then other programs, there have been examples that have shown ability to delay pregnancy, sexual and transactional sex. We did another study with Amber Peterman and colleagues, and we looked at the ability of social safety net program to reduce violence against children and adolescents. And what we see is that results are very promising for protecting adolescent girls against sexual exploitation and abuse, but less so for other violence against children outcomes, largely because they were not very often studied. However, since we published this paper in 2017, other studies have come out showing that social protection programs can reduce violence against children, even though these violence outcomes are not main objectives of these programs. These programs are designed to reduce poverty and food insecurity, but we see a lot of evidence that they reduce violence among children and women. And new studies have shown protective impacts on violence against children in diverse settings, such as Mali and Bangladesh. Zooming in on Africa, we did another systematic review with colleagues from UNICEF, led by Kate Rogers, who is in the audience here today. And we looked at cash plus bundled programming. So programs targeted to adolescents that combine both an economic component as well as a health and life skills component. Several of these studies were led by Population Council and Dr. Austrian and colleagues. And what we find is that these bundled programs had strong impacts on improving economic security, HIV prevention knowledge, sexual and reproductive health, as well as mental health. And then when we looked at impacts on more relational outcomes such as gender-based violence, sexual risk behavior, HIV incidents, there were examples in all of these categories of programs that had protective impacts, but they were fewer than half. And so what that tells us is that probably individual targeted programming is not sufficient to overcome all of the barriers that adolescents face for these interrelational outcomes, and more community-based programming, broader gender norms, interventions are probably needed for some of these outcomes. So when we think about program design, the main takeaways are, first and foremost, social protection is primarily a tool for economic support. So we need to make sure that this core component is well designed and meaningful. It needs to be well targeted. Program payments need to be predictable as well as adjusted for inflation. If the real value of the transfer declines rapidly, then these programs are not going to have strong impacts. The design features should also be empowering to adolescent girls and women, and this aspect should be guided by a deep understanding of the gender dynamics in different settings. Complementary programming, which we're going to hear more about today, is highly promising. And these should involve different line ministries when we think about scaling up beyond just social protection ministries to provide the plus elements and integrate them as part of their sectoral strategies. And thus, ministries can integrate them overall as government strategy for poverty reduction and gender equality. So to sum up, social safety nets have positive impacts on adolescent well-being, including education, sexual and reproductive health, mental health, and violence prevention. Integrated social protection, including Cash Plus programming, can help address multi-dimensional needs to facilitate safe transitions to adulthood among adolescents. Diverse design and delivery features can facilitate this adolescent well-being and should be well tailored to the context. So for the researchers in the room, what do we need to do next? First, we need better measurement. We need to understand coverage of social protection programs by sex, individual level indicators, direct measures of empowerment such as agency, self-efficacy, and autonomy. We also need improved analysis, so it's not enough to just collect the data. We need gender disaggregated outcomes and analysis. We need to compare males and females, both children and adults. We need to understand the synergistic effects of plus components on these plus programs. We need to understand contextual moderators, so what is affecting the level of the impacts in a certain context, including gender norms, quality of existing services, and we also need mixed method research. So qualitative data can really help us improve our understanding of how women view empowerment within the household, inter-household processes, and we need more testing and scaling of innovative intersectoral programming. So I invite you all to visit our Cash Transfer and Intimate Partner Violence Research Collaborative. Information is on the screen here, and thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much. Can we give Tia another round of applause, please? Thank you. So that was a great overview, and I'm gonna now dive into a case study of the Adolescent Girls Initiative Kenya, which is a program I've had the real honor to lead over the last 10 years. It's a Cash Plus program aimed at increasing education and delaying marriage amongst adolescent girls. So a bit about AGIK. So as I mentioned, we're now 10 years into AGIK, and so it's gone through a few phases. The first phase was a 6-year longitudinal research study that was funded by DFID Kenya at the time, where we were looking at the initial impacts in the short and medium term of the combination of interventions and cash transfer plus a couple others. And then we had an extension phase where we came back and did a 6-year follow-up to really look at the longer term outcomes or the longer term effects of this 2-year program. And then, and I'll go into all of these, we are concluding a testing for scale phase where we're now doing a government implemented version of the program. And we're really looking to assess what's the most cost-effective version of AGIK that can be sustainably scaled up by the county government where the initial program was implemented. So when we started with the design back in 2014, what were we trying to learn? So there were 2 main research questions. The first was what package of multi-sectoral, so trying to improve a range of outcomes at the same time, including education, health, violence prevention, economic strengthening, as well as multi-level interventions. So combining a package of interventions, some of which targeted the girl directly, some which were meant to strengthen the household, and others at the community level. So which was the right package of interventions? And the second was, if we intervened early, so when girls were 11 to 14 years old, in that window just before we start to see, school dropout, child marriage, child pregnancy, and really where that sort of their life really takes a very different trajectory. So if we intervene right before that, does that then have long-term outcomes in the years after the program is over and as they move into late adolescence and early adulthood? So the first phase of AGIK had 4 program components. The first was around community engagement. So this was a community-level intervention, community conversations of key influential adults in the community, really looking at addressing inequitable gender norms in the community and improving the value, sort of perception of the value of girls' education. The second intervention was a conditional cash transfer. So this was a household level intervention aiming to address some of the economic constraints that households faced by sort of a every other month cash transfer so long as the adolescent girl was enrolled in attending school. The third intervention component was girls' empowerment groups or safe spaces. These were groups that met once a week in the community, facilitated by a young woman. And we had sort of two versions of that. One where they received training on a wide range of health and life skills topics, and another where we also added in financial literacy and savings. So those were girl-level interventions. So what we saw, at the end of the 2-year program, we saw improvements in short-term outcomes around financial literacy for those in that package. We saw health knowledge improvements for those in that package. But where it starts to get really exciting is that 2 years after the program ended, so this is 2 years after the last group meeting, after the last cash transfer was dispersed, we still saw strong impacts, in particular for girls who were out of school when the program started. So we saw that girls were still 3 times more likely to still be enrolled in school, 20 percentage points less likely to be married, and about half as likely to have ever been pregnant. We came back 2 years later, so we're now 4 years after the program ended, and we still see the same trends of girls still being much more likely, almost 5 times as likely to still be enrolled in school, less likely to be married, and hence pregnant. So these were very exciting results, and as we started to see the long-term impacts, we were engaged in, there was a lot of interest from the county government. So this program was being implemented in a place called Wajir County, which in Kenya is up on the northeast border with Somalia. It's quite a socially conservative area. It's an area of very high rates of child marriage and low rates of school enrollment. And the county government was very cognizant of these issues and said, this program works, what can we do to take it on? So once we had the results, we started really engaging in conversations with the county executive members. So this is like the cabinet at the county level, but getting support from the governor of Wajir. We had to pause a little bit because of COVID, but then I think that even sort of increased the desire of the county government to really want to head-on address girls not being in school, issues of early marriage. And so we were able to secure funding to have a testing for scale phase. And in this phase, really the objective was not just about impact, but it was really about identifying what was the most cost-effective version of AGIK that could be sustainably scaled up by the Wajir County government. And so we were, in addition to impact, we were also looking at scalability, the feasibility of implementing these through government and community structures, as well as the cost. One of the key decisions that the county took about this was to domicile or to house AGIK within the Ministry of Health, but to deliver it in coordination with Ministries of Education and Gender. So because of the multiple, this is a multi-sectoral program, in theory, it sort of delayed marriage via keeping girls in school. It could have been owned by the Ministry of Education, it could have been owned by the Ministry of Health, but that just was a critical decision because in Kenya, the Ministry of Health is devolved to the county level, so the county could really own it, make budget decisions, and take it on. So in this phase, we tested sort of a streamlined version of the original AGIK intervention. So across all 3 sort of packages that we tested, we had the community conversation groups. So again, addressing norms at the community level. We also have the girls' empowerment groups. So providing health education, life skills, as well as financial literacy. And then what we varied to see the impact of was how we did the cash transfer. So we tested one version of it where there was actually a community level incentive. So the idea was if the community could reach a certain level of girls' school enrollment, they would be eligible for a project to be implemented that valued about $6,500. In addition, girls who were out of school when the program started got a one-time cash transfer when they enrolled in school. The third package was the most similar to the original AGIK, so it was a household level cash transfer. But what we did was we sort of reshaped the cash transfer so that there were larger transfers for girls who were out of school, which improved the cost effectiveness of the program, because that's where the benefit was highest. But we still had small cash transfers available for those that were in school because we didn't want to disincentivize girls dropping out of school. But as I mentioned, this was really about, can the government implement this program? So it was implemented through what's called the Community Health Unit. This is funded and managed by the Ministry of Health. The community conversations were led by community health assistants who are on the county payroll. And sort of they leverage their once a month community barazas. So in addition to talking about things like breastfeeding and vaccination and maternal care, they were also talking about inequitable gender norms, the importance of girls' education, etc. And the safe spaces groups, so the girls' empowerment groups, these were facilitated by the community health volunteers who are supervised by the CHAs. They're also part of the community health unit. So again, those whole components were now just taken up and implemented and monitored and supervised by the county government. In parallel, we did a lot of policy support work to ensure that we were creating an enabling legal framework for AGIK so that it could be fully adopted should the results of the study turn out to be positive. So we helped to support passing the Community Health Services Bill, which allows for financing of the CHV, so they now earn stipends paid out of the county budget. We worked on the ensuring that AGIK is now embedded within the 5-year county integrated development plan, as well as ensuring that it is in the annual development plan, as well as the budget. So did it work? So what we see here is that half of girls in both of the arms that had the cash incentive returned to school amongst the girls that were out of school, which is actually a very similar level to what we saw in the first round RCT, which was implemented by an NGO, very tightly monitored and heavy. So we saw actually quite similar results in this new government implemented version, which is really exciting and really encouraging. And now there is a 2024 cohort of AGIK rolling out in a new set of villages in Wajir County, sort of owned by that as we are now engaging in some next steps. We're continuing to engage with the county executive to see how to fully now integrate in the cash component. There are a couple of different avenues, whether that be leveraging the national social protection program. There is a county department for social protection. And one thing that I just want to point out, because I think it's really interesting, just the cash transfer is much more cost effective than what I should show is also what we see here is that pretty much the impact was similar if it was the community incentive versus the household cash transfer. And even though the household cash transfer was much cheaper and hence more cost effective, but from a scalability perspective, the county is much more confident that they can budget for and roll out the community level incentives, which are essentially infrastructure projects conditioned on school enrollment. And so as we look at further scale up of the program county-wide, it's an interesting, on paper, what is cost effective might not actually be the most sort of feasible and scalable. So that's an interesting conversation that's currently going on. So we're working with the county on sort of fully, just a little bit more technical support on fully embedding within their M&E platforms, within their training systems for the community health volunteers, and really leveraging sort of national momentum now in Kenya around strengthening community health systems, and using that to expand into additional counties. So thanks. This has been a decade of work with many, many partners, and we hope it's an interesting case study of how we can do Cash Plus, and really using research to guide scale, which has been an exciting process to be part of. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Greetings from Zambia. So the Jewel project, like it has been said, is a cash plus model that we are implementing in Zambia. So in my presentation, I will give you the background for the Jewel project, speak to the components of the Jewel project. This is a cash plus. So I'll briefly speak to the components, and I'm glad that I've been joined by a colleague who is managing one of the components under the Jewel project. We'll give the rationale, and I'll also discuss the support services that we are providing under the Keeping Girls in School initiatives. I will discuss the bottlenecks and some recommendations, and probably through this audience, we could get some ideas on how we can improve some of the challenges that we faced with. So we started implementing in 2016 after the government of the Republic of Zambia entered into a financing agreement with the World Bank. The project in itself is focusing on vulnerable girls and vulnerable women. So how do you determine vulnerability in the context of Zambia? We use the social cash transfer in determining vulnerability. So once these households are identified, then the World Bank and the government agreed to support those who were benefiting from the social cash transfer through a cash plus model. So once a household is identified, the first level of support that you are provided with through the cash plus model is supporting women's livelihoods. So you go to this household which is receiving social cash transfer and identify a female member of that particular household, give them training, life and business skills. On top of that, you give them a productivity grant of about $225, which they can invest in any business of their choice. In component number 2 of the Jewel project, if that same household has a girl child in secondary school, pick up support, ensure they complete their secondary school education. In the third component, and I'm glad she spoke about policy support, we are providing through the project support to review policies, to develop policies, and also strengthen M&E through that. So that's a cash plus kind of strategy that we're implementing in Zambia. So at the base of it, it's a social cash transfer. To that, add a layer of support for women's livelihoods, add another layer of support for keeping girls in school, which is basically investment in human capital. Going forward, there is a strong consideration for us to add the health component, which should be in terms of nutrition support, again, to the same households that are receiving social cash transfer. So we're basically focusing on girls. We know even the boys could be vulnerable, but we're focusing on the girls because education attainment in Zambia is quite low among the girls. About 31% are completing secondary school compared to 36% of the male counterparts. We also, apparently in Zambia, when you're starting primary school, when you enroll in grade 1, you actually have more girls than the boys. But as they go up to grade 4 to grade 5, the girls begin to drop out. So the government thought it wise to invest more in supporting the girls so that they could stay in school. But also when you go into rural Zambia, if you found this household, you find a dad and a mom, which child are you going to invest in terms of going to school? They will say, we'll invest in a boy child. They would rather have an immediate economic gain from a girl child by quickly marrying her off. So for that reason, again, the government thought it wise to give more support to the girl child through the Keeping Girls in School initiative. So what is it that we are giving to the girls once we identify them? There's a cash incentive, like you put it. So we give them an education grant, about 600 kwacha, which is equivalent to about $25 given the current exchange rate. So that money is meant for these girls to buy books, they can get a uniform, they can get school shoes or a school bag. And this amount of money we're giving them is actually motivating them. It's cushioning them. They don't need to go look for money for these 600 to buy uniforms and so forth. We also have a situation where there are some girls who are moving long distances on a daily basis to go to school because of the scarcity of secondary school facilities in most of the rural parts of Zambia. So we pay them a weekly boarding fee so that when they move on a Sunday or a Monday, they don't need to walk back home. They can be in school and only return back home on a Friday or Saturday to go and stock up and then they continue schooling. So we're supporting those girls as well with some small stipend to allow the schools keep them in school on a weekly basis. We've continued to pay boarding fees for those who can formally move into a boarding school on a temporary basis. We pay them a 1,000 kwacha, which is about $45. And before the new government came in 2021, we were paying tuition fees even for those who were in day school. And since the new government came in, it's free education in Zambia, but you still need to pay a boarding fee. And so that is why we maintain that component. We're beginning to pay to provide sanitary towels as well to the girls, and reusable sanitary towels. We commenced this year. We are also helping to renovate the weekly boarding facilities. If you can see, most of them are in very dilapidated state. So we are helping to renovate the weekly boarding facilities so that the girls are safer and secure while they are in school. Okay, so since we started, we've been increasing our enrollment. We started from as low as 9,000. As we closed the year 2023, we are standing at 94,095 girls, which the project has been supporting. And since we started, we've supported over 148,000 girls. Interestingly, we started in 16 districts. We have 116 districts in Zambia. I think that's what you call as a county in Yamani. So in Zambia, we have 116 districts. We are now in 65 districts. We've increased from 16 to 65, and we hope that by 2026, that is our plan, we'll have covered the whole country in terms of supporting the girls. So what I showed you was a basic package, that one. That's a basic package that we give to the girls. But in addition to that, we've developed support systems. So when we did a study in 2018, we discovered that the issue of finances was preventing the girls from being in school. Second to that was the issue of school-related GBV. And so we are also investing in strengthening awareness, teaching the girls, the school administrators, and the communities as well on how to prevent school-related GBV. And if at all it occurred, where should they run to? Where do they get the support services from? So we've been piloting this in 3 districts in Zambia. We concluded late last year, and we should be rolling out this intervention to the rest of the 65 districts where we are supporting our girls. We've also invested in feedback mechanisms. So this is a grievance redress mechanism. So there are three methods through which our girls and the community members can give us feedback on how well we are implementing these interventions. So we've placed complaint boxes in our communities, and the community members have a say where we can place these complaint boxes so that it's more convenient for them to give us feedback. We've also trained female focal point persons in the lowest levels of the community, and we call these lowest levels as the community welfare assistance committees. So a group of households, they'll form a committee, and then we identify a female focal point person to whom members who've got complaints can go to, and we provide them with complaint books they can record, and then we have a system of collecting and providing feedback. We also have a hotline, and so members of the public can call a toll-free line. This was being managed by an NGO. We are now in the process of establishing a government-led hotline that members of the public can use in terms of giving us feedback. Did we leave out a girl who should have been on KGS? Did we pay the education grant? If we did not pay, then members of the community can call us, then we can respond to them. So we've also developed what we call it a case management system. There are some girls whom we've given support as keeping girls in schools, but they don't just want to do this. So we are interested in following up on those girls. We are interested in finding out why is it that you are not coming through to take up this support. Is there anything more that we can do for you? We are also interested in the girls who've received the support. They even attended school maybe once, twice, they back off. We are interested in following up and try to see if we can give them extra support so that they return in school. The girls who completely refuse to get back into school, we don't just leave them, we recommend them to other empowerment support services that would be available within their jurisdiction. We are also interested in the girls who are coming to school but in a very irregular manner, and they are at risk of dropping out. So we want to engage their parents, we want to engage their guardians and see how we can support them so that they do not drop out of school. And some of the things that we've identified which are making our learners drop out is poor academic performance. So through the case management system, we've introduced academic clinics which are provided to the girls who are lagging behind in terms of academic performance. So on a timely basis, we pay a stipend to identified teachers who can provide support in physics, chemistry, biology, math, and English. Because these are some of the subjects where our girls tend to perform well. We are also encouraging these girls through what we call district symposiums. So we bring role models to come and speak to the girls. We bring doctors, we bring nurses, we bring military personnel, we bring lawyers. So each of the 65 districts will organize this so that we bring people who are already in the industry to just encourage the girls, so that they can see hope beyond just being in a classroom. The other thing that we're doing through case management is exposure visits. These are girls in remote areas of Zambia. So we try to bring them from the remotest areas, probably into Lusaka, which is the capital city of Zambia, just for them to see what a shopping mall looks like, how the University of Zambia looks like, the Lusaka University looks like. So this tends to motivate them and just see beyond the rural areas where they could be and see what, and hopefully in one of the upcoming visits to New York, we can bring one KGS here. At some point, we took some of the girls to South Africa, which is more advanced than Zambia in terms of infrastructure. We also do home visits, so we do procure bicycles for our guidance and counseling teachers to be mobile to visit homes, to visit communities, and engage the parents or guardians where these girls are coming. Like I said, we're beginning to provide the sanitary towels, which is also another aspect that may push the girls from regularly attending class. Recently, we've introduced, and this is fully supported by the government of the Republic of Zambia, we're providing tertiary support. So all the girls that are completing grade 12 in Zambia, or those who are completing secondary school, they have this free support. Everything is for free. Once they complete grade 12, they have passed grade 12, we help them get a school in a university, place in a university, a college or a skill center, and government pays everything. So all the girl child needs to do is to complete grade 12, and then government takes up that. So they will pay the tuition fees at university or college, they will pay the meal allowance on a monthly basis, they will pay the application fee, all the costs related with tertiary education provided for, and this is non-competitive. And so far, only about 673 girls are currently in universities and colleges with this support. This year, we hope to increase this number to about 2,000. The funds are already available for the girls to take up this. So this is also providing as an extra motivation for the girls out there to complete grade 12. In terms of the bottlenecks, there is still a challenge in the rural areas of the negative attitude towards girl child. So we're trying to continuously undertake sensitization in the communities in terms of girl child education. We're implementing this in very hard to reach areas. So we need a lot of transport in terms of vehicles, in terms of motor bicycles, in terms of bicycles to reach out to the communities and the learners themselves. Ideally, having coordinated this project, I would love all my girls to be in boarding facilities. They are safer there. Unfortunately, we do not have adequate boarding facilities. So that could be the other challenge that we are faced with. Thank you so much for it.
Thank you, Mr. Caputo, for that wonderful presentation. I would like to now invite Valerie Schlaffer up. So she is a senior at Baruch College studying public affairs and economics. Her academic interests include tech policy, diplomacy, and intersectional qualitative analysis. She's currently doing her undergraduate thesis on the rhetoric of Russia's state-sanctioned television following the invasion of Ukraine and its effect on social media. Valerie is currently interning at Dress for Success Worldwide, and we are very happy to have her moderating the panel discussion this morning. Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you, Dr. Palermo. So you've already met two of our panel participants, Mr. Caputo and Dr. Palermo, but we have two other amazing speakers joining us. We have Lauren Whitehead, who is the lead for social protection and gender on the social policy and social protection team at UNICEF, where she oversees a global portfolio of work strengthening gender responsive social protection with colleagues across more than 150 countries and territories that UNICEF serves. Through social protection, her current work entails system strengthening, unpaid care and support, poverty reduction, and economic empowerment, ending violence against women and children, and addressing the gender impacts of humanitarian crises and climate. Previously, she was Chief Technical Specialist for the Generation Equality Action Coalitions at UN Women, overseeing delivery of thematic coalitions between governments, UN agencies, IFIs, foundations, private sector, and civil society to accelerate progress towards SDG 5 on gender equality. Prior to this, Lauren spent 6 years at BRAC, the world's largest international NGO, where she led as the Director of Technical Assistance, overseeing engagements with governments worldwide. She has also worked with UNHCR, Asia Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, and various nonprofit organizations in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. She holds an MA from Georgetown University and a BA from Princeton University. We are also being joined by Rachel Mason, who is the Gender and Social Protection Lead at the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, and she's responsible for the FDCO's Gender Responsive Social Protection Program, which aims to enhance outcomes for the most marginalized women and girls globally. Rachel has worked in various social and economic policy roles across the UK government over the last 6 years, including most recently at His Majesty's Treasury. Rachel co-chairs alongside Lauren Whitehead from UNICEF, the Gender Working Group of the Social Protection Interagency Cooperation Board, the ACB, which has over 80 members from governments, multilateral, bilateral development agencies, and civil society. Thank you so much for joining us. So we've heard a lot today about programs, about how both NGOs and governments are able to administer their social protection program. Lauren, can you tell us a little bit about how UNICEF leverages its close working relationship with government counterparts across multiple sectors, including education, health, and social protection, to ensure that program outcomes for adolescent girls across these sectors are synergistic and ultimately able to achieve outcomes greater than the sum of their parts? How does social protection play a unique role in this integration?
Thank you very much, and thank you as well to all our colleagues from Population Council and some of the other partners who are here today. So very glad to represent UNICEF on this panel. And I'll start with just a few points in relation to the question that was shared. And I think it's great actually to have come after some of the previous presentations, because I think a lot of the things that I'll speak to are things that we already have heard resonated this morning, perhaps. So my focus really with this response is thinking about integrated social protection programming. So social protection programming that's quite multi-sectoral in nature, that has a foundation around social protection, but then that also leverages linkages to other sectors. And what does that look like and what do we learn? So to start from that basis, I would actually say UNICEF really recognizes social protection as being a right for households, a right for children, a right for adolescents. And if we think about it from this vantage point, then it makes quite a lot of sense why we would focus on a multi-sectoral response, because a multi-sectoral response necessarily takes into account sort of the multi-dimensional aspects of a person's life, the multi-dimensional barriers or deprivations they might face, the opportunities that there might be that are available ahead of them, etc. And it does not exclude the population of adolescents, for example. When we think about social protection as a foundation or as an anchor, we also think about it as a door to access other services that might otherwise, that people might otherwise be excluded from or have difficulty in accessing. And I think in all of the examples we heard today from Zambia, for example, on Kenya as well, and then several I think that Tia mentioned earlier, we've seen a lot of this act of social protection becoming a door and forming these kinds of linkages. When we're thinking about adolescents, in particular, for UNICEF, we really look at the life course perspective of an individual's life, so starting from birth all the way through your life into older age. And in doing that, really understanding what some of those key developmental stages are that children and adolescents especially go through, and therefore what kind of services that they'll need that can then become part of these linkages to social protection. So for example, from the very beginning, our girls registered from birth so that they can access child benefits, because if you're not on the list, you're not going to receive benefits. You're basically invisible to social registries for the duration of your life. Is there money enough available in a household to keep girls and boys in school? We've heard a lot about that around girls' education especially, rather than engaging in child marriage or child labor, for example, which we see. Do adolescent girls have access to the resources and health services they need for menstrual hygiene and other sexual and reproductive health services? And then even do both parents, for example, have access to care and support policies like paid parental leave, like affordable childcare, because that actually has impacts on the adolescents in their household and what kind of care responsibilities they're expected to take on, and in many cases, in some cases, being removed from school to be able to provide those care responsibilities for their household. So we look at a couple of different ways in terms of leveraging this multi-sectoralism to provide more adolescent-sensitive social protection. So again, thinking about social protection as the anchor, or kind of the hub, and the spokes being to many other sectors that need to necessarily be a part. And this really pertains to programming and policies that can be directly targeted at adolescents, which we've heard several of today, as well as those that indirectly benefit adolescents because they are directed to households where adolescents reside. So first of all, thinking about some of the issues that we know adolescents face, some of the things that I think Tia mentioned earlier and shared on the beautiful graphs that we saw on the screen, around adolescents being disproportionately affected by things like early transitions into adulthood, which looks like early sexual debut. It looks like a higher prevalence of having older partners, especially for economic reasons. It can look like early marriage, high levels of pregnancy, especially unintended pregnancies, unsafe or risky sex, especially transactional sex, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If we look globally around the world, we know that 1 in 3 girls in countries like Sierra Leone and countries like the Dominican Republic and many other countries are actually married before the age of 18, which then has a whole host of knock-on effects for those populations. We also know that adolescent girls, for example, in Africa, are some of the ones that are experiencing the highest rates of new HIV infections, even as globally HIV infections are on the decline, for example. So when you think about it from that perspective, then we start to assess, well, then where are the gaps? Where are the gaps in why they're not being able to access services? Where are the gaps in why they aren't being able to avail of those services, even if they exist, et cetera? And then how do you build around that? So Ujana Salama was one of the program approaches that Tia mentioned earlier in Tanzania. And in that particular case, it really focused on targeting households that were receiving the productive social safety nets already from the government that was administered by TASIF, and then linking to some of those other support services they needed. Support services on gender-based violence, training around sexual and reproductive health and HIV, access to contraception as well, and then of course these productive grants so that there was an economic component for adolescents. Something very interesting about Ujana Salama, which I think Tia did actually mention as well, was that it targeted both adolescent girls and adolescent boys, which is quite a distinguishing factor because many programs we see often just target, for example, adolescent girls, given the deprivations they face. But because we had that targeting of both girls and boys, that was part of why you saw some more of the movement along some of the outcomes in the program around increasing gender equitable attitudes, for example, among adolescents, around decreasing rates of sexual violence, especially intimate partner violence in some of those relationships, and then of course around trying to move towards more safe sex practices among adolescents, for example. So really engaging both, but then providing those linking services. And so what we did as UNICEF to support some of that was, of course, supporting the social protection components as being the foundation of the program, but then also linking to the services from the Ministry of Health for a lot of those other wraparound pieces that adolescents needed. So that would just be one example. If we look at another issue facing adolescents, for example, adolescents tend to be hidden laborers in their households. We talk a lot about things like unpaid care and how unpaid care affects women, for example, which it does. Women perform 2 to 3 times, even 4 times as much unpaid care labor as men do. But we don't as often talk about unpaid care labors that adolescents take on, especially adolescent girls. So it's quite astounding to recognize the fact that every day adolescent girls perform 160 million hours collectively of unpaid care in their households. And then you have to ask the question, then what is that to the exclusion of? Very often it's to the exclusion of education, it's to the exclusion of economic opportunities, et cetera. Some of these girls, as we've mentioned, are being sold into child marriage by their families out of necessity. In many cases, around 12 million girls every year are being sold into child marriage, for example. So then how do you design an approach that tries to address all of those elements as well, recognizing there are poverty drivers, therefore having a basis in social protection, financial security for a household is critical, but more than that is happening. So cash is significant, but it's not sufficient in a case like that. So for example, in Benin, we work with the government there and particularly use the national cash transfer as a basis for targeting households where there were at-risk girls, and then built a series of community sensitization and mobilization activities around the cash transfer program in those communities to try to reverse the trends on child marriage. So for example, engaging religious leaders, engaging elders, both male and female, engaging adolescent boys as well in some of the programming that took place there, and then linking to access to services specifically for health, actually, which was seen as one of the major gaps that adolescents experience. So again, trying to drive some of these outcomes that we want to see, but using some of the interventions that we have that are circumnavigating a social protection program to be able to do that. And I won't go into all of the results of that particular program approach, but it was quite successful and is now something that's being replicated in many different countries. I mean, I think some people in the room probably know of the global program to end child marriage, which is a partnership with UNICEF and UNFPA and other partners. But that program actually in its next 6 years has identified social protection as being one of the most driving avenues in terms of scale to help reduce rates of child marriage globally for adolescents. So just thinking about some of these different approaches and how we can actually leverage some of these multi-sectoral perspectives. I would add one more example as well, because we were talking extensively about access to girls' education, for example, and thinking about the gaps that are still faced in access to education and kind of what role does social protection play. And I think we heard very well the example of Zambia and being able to link to additional services that would then enable girls to be able to access school, and really working at a granular level to identify what exactly is keeping her from being able to go to school. Is it access to transport? Is it access to sanitary towels, hygiene, things of this nature? So in Uganda, we were able to work with the Kampala Capital City Authority and institute the first ever urban social protection program that was specifically targeting adolescent girls who were either at risk of dropping out of school or who were already out of school. And when we look globally as well, adolescent girls tend to be about 2 times more likely to be out of school, neither in education, employment, or training than adolescent boys. So that was part of the reason to focus on them. And in that particular case, those households were provided with access to social protection, which was a novel approach considering that many urban households don't necessarily have access because many large-scale social protection programs focus on rural poverty. So being able to give cash transfers to those families, specifically with the intention to keep girls in school, to be able to ensure that households knew that the amount of money that they were being given was to be directed to keep girls in school. It was not a condition that was actually applied, it was just earmarked. It was said that this was going to be able to help cover tuition, additional school fees, transportation, etc. But then also providing mentorship for many of these girls to understand better the reasons why either they were dropping out, if it wasn't purely economic, or why they weren't able to return. And that revealed one key issue around the return of girls to school, especially after they've already had children. So even in cases where they were legally allowed to return to school, they experienced a lot of issues around social stigma. They experienced a lot of practical issues around how they were going to care for their children when they also had to return to school, etc. And so the program was able to actually design around that by really taking a granular approach, similar to Zambia, a granular approach to understanding the barriers, but then again, anchoring in social protection and linking to those support services. So GBV prevention support services was also a risk that was identified. Access to health services was an area that was identified, et cetera, et cetera. I won't go on with the examples, but I say all of this to say I think there are a lot of promising approaches in this way. I think there's a lot more that can be done, but I think some of that really takes recognizing that people have multi-dimensional deprivations that they experience, barriers that they experience. So we can address one major driver, economic drivers, for example, through poverty, through social protection, but if we don't really think about that larger transformative potential of social protection, we really are missing the mark in a lot of ways. And so I think it's very inspiring to see some of these different approaches, especially the Cash Plus approaches, that are trying to do that and that are really tailoring that to adolescents who unfortunately tend to be caught between childhood and adulthood and then fall through that missing middle in a lot of cases. So I'll stop there for now because I want to give other people time to speak, but thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. That was a really great answer. You really focused on the Plus and Cash Plus program and how important it is to provide additional services to adolescent girls to help them stay in school and prevent them from falling into a lot of traps related to adolescent marriage or pregnancy. And on that front, Mr. Caputo, as you described earlier, the Keeping Girls in School project is one of 3 components of a larger intersectoral project called Girls, Education, and Women Empowerment and Livelihoods Project, or JEWEL. What were the steps taken to ensure successful integration of activities and communication of program objectives across all levels, including national, district, and local?
Thank you. So, like I had mentioned, the Jewel project is a cash plus intervention, and so that involves working with a lot of stakeholders. But then how do you bring them together? So our starting point as a Jewel project is first of all identification and mapping of the stakeholders. Who is working in the social protection space? Who is interested in education from a social protection perspective? And so when we do that, we need to map that in the districts where we are operating. Interestingly, when you move from one district of the country to the other, you find these unique cultural practices. So you need to take that into account. As I go into district number one, what are the cultural issues that I need to be on a lookout for? So once you've done your identification and mapping of stakeholders, then the next thing that we did under the Jewel project was to do awareness through inception meetings. So we moved into these various districts to meet the stakeholders that we identified so that we could engage them on the best approaches to keeping the girls in school. You tend to find that in the eastern part of the country, there are a lot of NGOs working in the education space than any other part of the country. And so you need to be sensitive in the way you move in, because again, these non-government organizations have different interests where you're moving in. Then once you've done your inception meetings, then you move into capacity building. Through your inception meetings, you'll be able to identify the capacity gaps. Okay, so you need to fill in that gap by providing the skills and knowledge, but also create the structures that you might need in the implementation of your intervention. In this case, we work closely when we go to the lowest level of the communities, we work with the community welfare assistance committees. So you need to identify the capacity gaps, the knowledge gaps, so that you are able to assist in that area to ensure your intervention is well received. Interestingly, the traditional leaders are playing a lot in this, including the influential religious leaders. We don't ignore them, because when you go to the churches, people in the rural areas tend to adhere quite a lot to the traditional leaders and the religious leaders. So that's a critical entry point for us in terms of awareness creation, in terms of capacity building as well. Once that is done, then we continuously sensitize these communities, we continuously sensitize the stakeholders. And in the case of the Jewel project, we're working closely with the Ministry of Community Development. The lowest structure that I've been talking about of the CWACs, the Community Welfare Assistance Committees, that is established under the Ministry of Community Development and Social Services. And when we are identifying the girls, which girls should we support? For me, this is very interesting because we don't even know which girl we are going to support. So we have to request for the social cash transfer database from Ministry of Community Development to the Ministry of Education. Then we begin to filter which households have got girls reported to have had girls at the point of registration or updating the records for receiving social cash transfer. So it requires working with a number of stakeholders. So request for this database, it comes to Ministry of Education, and we're trying to make it digital now. And so once we receive that data, we'll do our own analysis. Once we've filtered those girls, we send that information to the districts for them to go on the ground and work with the CWACs to identify or to go and verify to say indeed the girl was reported to be in household A, exists in that household, and they are going to school or they dropped out of school. So at that point, again, we need to work with the lowest level, the head teachers. They need to confirm if the girls are there or they are out of school. or they failed an exam when they stayed away from school. So we are interested again in working with the Examination Council of Zambia. How do we bring back these girls? How do we pay for their examination fees for them to receive? In an interesting case where you have Elena interested in going back to school, they gave birth to a child, they have a baby they need to take care of. We need to invite NGOs that are providing psychosocial counseling because they face a lot of stigma. So we need to give them that psychosocial support through those partners who have identified at the first stage of identification and mapping. If these girls require support services to do with SRGBV, school-related gender-based violence, we would have identified some stakeholder at the first stage who can move in and provide sensitization in these schools and provide referral services to them. And so that is how we're working with different stakeholders. And when it becomes to grievance redress mechanism, again, we're working with Ministry of Information through their Zani services who are able to help us move around, collect the complaints, make public announcements in these local communities. So the aspect of identification of stakeholders, mapping, knowing where they are, what they are doing, when they are doing it, at what cost for us is a matter of interest. What kind of capacities they have, the capacity gaps is a matter of interest to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Caputo, for such a detailed example of the intricacies of implementing social protection programming. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Palermo to help us understand some examples of how gender-responsive or integrated social protection programming can actually achieve these beneficial outcomes for adolescents beyond typical social protection objectives, which are often more limited to poverty and food security.
Thank you for that question. So one of the areas where social protection programming has been very successful in improving outcomes beyond their main objectives of poverty and food insecurity is around violence reduction, both among women, but also children, including adolescent girls. So for example, in one example in South Africa, an NGO implemented cash transfer program provided to both adolescent girls and their caregivers was able to reduce intimate partner violence among adolescent girls between the ages of 13 and 20 years old by 34%. In over 3 years, what was seen is that this program both delayed sexual debut and reduced the number of sexual partners, which are posited to be some of the mediators through which the cash transfer was able to reduce experiences of intimate partner violence. As Lauren mentioned, in Tanzania, the Ujana Salama program reduced sexual violence among adolescent girls by 5 percentage points, and it reduced perpetration of physical violence among adolescent boys by 6 percentage points. The program also improved gender equitable attitudes among boys, HIV testing, and mental health. Turning to Mozambique, there was another program implemented by government which was not targeted to adolescents in particular, but it was adolescent sensitive. So it was targeted to women who had a child between the ages of 0 and 2 years old, including adolescent mothers. This was a cash plus care program which provided cash transfers to households as well as community-based care management. And one adolescent-sensitive design component of that program is that while only 10 to 15% of the most vulnerable households were screened into this community care management programming, all adolescent mothers in the program were automatically screened into that case management. The program was found to reduce intimate partner violence by 38%, and the program also increased mental health, decision-making, and economic standing. Due to the high success of this program, there has been commitment by government to scale it up nationally. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Palermo. It's very important to understand that alongside the implementation and results, we also have to consider competing priorities of people who might be funding these initiatives. So Rachel, how does FCDO balance donor priorities to make social protection gender transformative with realities on the ground, where programs may still be gender blind or gender neutral? What is FCDO doing to help governments take steps on the continuum of gender responsive social protection programming? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Valerie. I'm going to take those 2 points back to front, if I may. I'll start with what FCDO is doing and then talk about how we balance that with realities on the ground. So what are we doing? So at a really high level, FCDO is taking concrete steps to systematically mainstream gender into all of our UK aid programming. So this time last year, we released an international women and girls strategy, and that commits us to making sure at least 80% of our programming has a gender equality focus by 2030. So we're really trying to make this a priority across the organisation and make sure it's baked into everything we do. On social protection specifically, we're currently supporting governments with their national programmes and systems in over 20 countries, including, for example, contributing to the dual programme, as well as programmes with specific gender focus in, for example, Ethiopia and Bangladesh. We're funding 9 research programmes looking specifically at adolescent girls. We did a mapping recently to try and figure out what we were doing, and it came out that there's just a huge amount across a whole range of issues, SRHR, violence, economic empowerment, transition to employment, education, of course. And on top of that, we're funding 2 longitudinal studies. One is the Young Lives Research Programme. Kath is here from Young Lives, and I will just plug the lovely photo exhibit that will be accompanying the UNICEF and FCDO and Hewlett Foundation hosted We Deserve Better event tomorrow evening. And also the Gender and Adolescence Global Evidence Programme. And both of these are generating amazing evidence on what works across children and adolescent lives, across that whole range of outcomes. There's one amazing thing that stayed with me from a chat I had with Kath a few weeks ago, relating to adolescent girls experiencing climate shocks, malnutrition and rainfall shocks, and not even being pregnant yet, but seeing the impacts of those shocks in future babies that they have and in the height of those children up until adolescence. Just a few things like that, really incredible, so I'll just highlight that one. But our main focus for this year and next is the vast evidence base that's being generated as part of our gender responsive social protection programme, which is coming to an end next year. So we've got research coming out of UNICEF in Achenti, they're here somewhere, they're at the back. Our GRASP research, gender responsive age sensitive social protection, is that right? Yeah, programme research. And that, alongside learning from our technical assistance facilities, STAR, and the World Bank RSR gender window, is just going to form a massive body of evidence that's going to emerge over the next sort of 12 to 18 months. So a key focus for us this year is making sure that we get that learning and evidence to governments so that they can make the best evidence-based decisions in their programmes, in their systems. So back to the first part of the question now, if I may. How do we match these ambitions to make programmes and systems gender transformative with the realities we face on the ground? So 3 points. We need to start from a point of engaging with local communities and especially women's rights organisations in those communities. And we've recently published an international development white paper which recognises that the UK needs to fundamentally shift its approach to partnerships, so that we're speaking directly with the people who are involved with and impacted by these programmes, and so that women, girls and marginalised people can really drive the change they want in their lives, both in stable and crisis contexts. In a similar vein, and this is kind of coming out a little bit today, is the need to be sensitive to the specific circumstances that we're operating in. And part of that is kind of recognising where the boundaries are and not going too hard, too fast, and taking a pragmatic approach when we need to. Obviously, we want to get to gender transformative programmes and systems everywhere, but not where that's going to result in a sort of backlash or have adverse effects. So There's some evidence coming out of the GRASP research, for example, where if the programme aims clash too much with the prevailing gender norms, particularly in a more conservative community, that can result in the opposite effect to what we wanted to achieve. You know, that can decrease contraceptive use among adolescents rather than increase it. So we just sort of need to be guided by, and related to that first point, guided by the local communities and thinking about that. And finally, and again, this has kind of come up a bit today, which I'm really pleased about, is we need to go beyond just thinking about women and girls. And obviously it's really important, and we recognise that we need to think about adolescent girls, but we need a broader approach which also engages men and boys and the kind of norm holders and power holders within the community, and thinks about gender more holistically. And we don't do that enough at FCGO. I think that's, I'm happy to say that. I'm aware it's being recorded, but I think across the sector, you know, we're starting to see amazing examples of where this is happening and the real impact that it can have. So I think the more we can keep our focus on girls, because, you know, based on the specific challenges that they face, but recognise that they exist in a wider ecosystem, and that also needs to be built into everything we're doing. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lauren. So to wrap us up, because you guys talked about different organizations from academia to development funds to NGOs and government offices, I was wondering what's one piece of advice all of you would give to the government staff designing integrated social protection programming to benefit adolescents, to make it adolescent sensitive and or gender responsive? Open to everyone.
I can move in quickly, as I'm already talking. I've got two quick thoughts. One is, and it sounds really obvious, but systematically building gender from the start, make sure it's in there all the way through. Tia, you talked about fidelity to design, and again, a big focus of the kind of research that's coming out of the GRASP programme is the gap that still exists between design and implementation, and thinking about best intentions at design phase don't necessarily translate into the impact we want to see at implementation. So I think there needs to be a sort of a recognition that gender permeates everything. It's not just kind of an add-on at the end. You know, we experience it day to day, every single day, and it's not just sort of a little tick box, but also that we need to kind of make sure we're building that in all the way through. And secondly, the point I was going to make, and it feels completely irrelevant given the massive, you know, the huge focus on this today, is just looking at things holistically and looking across the range of issues that women and girls face, not just focusing on education here or violence here. You know, girls don't experience that separately, they experience it as part of their lives. So, and I think we need to get better at articulating that. And, you know, our Women and Girls strategy kind of recognise social protection as a key enabler of economic empowerment, but why didn't it recognise it across everything? And, you know, so I think there's a real need for us to just recognise that we experience things all in one go, and so we need to take a holistic approach to that.
Just go down the line. So what I would say to implementers of social protection programming and those that are designing programs to be more gender responsive and adolescent sensitive is that it doesn't need to be a complete overhaul of systems. There are key entry points where gender can be taken into account. And these include, first and foremost, when designing programmings, these should be informed by gender assessments. So we know that context and vulnerabilities can differ depending on context. And so gender assessments should understand what are the key vulnerabilities in any given setting, the existing prevailing gender norms, etc. Programs can also be designed with consultations from community-based groups. So women's organizations can be consulted both in the needs and the design. They can participate in making sure that women have access to grievance mechanisms that are transparent and well-functioning. They can also be part of reform coalitions and participating in gender budget audits. And programs can be designed in terms of gender-sensitive components, thinking about what programs are being implemented, as I mentioned earlier, for example, public works programs. So what community infrastructure programs are being developed, are these helping to alleviate women's time burdens? So consulting with those local women's groups on the ground in just deciding what types of programs are being targeted for these public works programs.
Sure, happy to go next. And I think maybe echoing in some of what we've heard already, especially around engaging affected populations. But I would say, I think one key thing that we're learning through the GRASP program, like what Rachel was just mentioning, we've also been doing some work with the Hewlett Foundation as well on policy-informed evidence making. What does it take to scale that? What does it take where we have large bodies of evidence, especially around things like cash transfers in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, and gender equality outcomes. And I think something that we're finding and we're really wrestling with is you have availability of so much evidence. We want to drive evidence-informed policymaking, but availability doesn't necessarily equate to uptake, which I think is something that we've heard, and we're all grappling with, well, how do we really transition to uptake? How do we really think about the bottlenecks that policymakers, other actors in the development sphere face, and then how do we overcome some of those? And I think there's a variety of ways, but I would just pick two maybe to really stand out. One is really around seeding the support that's needed, the championing, the advocacy, et cetera, for this work within multiple sectors. So we talk a lot about social protection or even gender ministries being an anchor, but it's very important that from the get-go, you have on board the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Forestry, obviously Ministry of Finance, which we all talk about, how do we crack that nut with the Ministry of Finance and get them on board with the work we're doing. But when you have these other ministries taking ownership and really being embedded as a part of a research agenda even from the outset, then you're able to really help generate that internal buy-in that will really support across ministries to help execute on some of these, especially the more multi-sectoral integrated approaches that we're talking about. But I think also seeding that ownership as well with other actors, especially those in the advocacy space like civil society and grassroots organizations. So really being able to get to a place of more evidence-informed advocacy to keep that pressure, that political pressure that needs to happen, to keep that grassroots focus, to bring it down to even, for example, subnational government level, that necessarily won't happen sort of in the hallowed halls of a capital city, for example. And how do we make sure that that evidence is in the right hands there as well? And one aspect of that I think Rachel alluded to is, for example, we've initiated the We Deserve Better initiative, which is about engaging women and girl-led organizations specifically to really be able to put pressure on duty bearers and others in their lives to demand some of the things that they really feel they need from social protection. They need some of the things we've heard are greater access to care and support policies, being involved in the national climate dialogues that are happening. Right now, only 2%, I think it is, of all national climate strategies and plans even mention girls, for example. They're completely left out of the equation, and yet we know that there's significant gender risks that they face by climate, and so on and so on. We've heard things around gender-based violence, we've heard things around economic empowerment issues, but really how are you engaging these organizations so they also can wrap arms around the agenda, especially the evidence, and really be able to push the development community, policymakers, et cetera, for this kind of change.
You could allow me to just wrap up in a sentence. So it has to be stakeholder engagement, evidence-based design, and community engagement. Thank you.
All right, everyone. So now we're going to turn it over to all of you. We would love to hear your questions. We're going to collect more than one so that we can maybe try and combine some of the questions for the sake of time, but we'll take about 3 or 4 questions.
I would need to get together with you all at a time when I can really have some time to talk to you all. My name is Patricia Bradley. I am, this is hard, a gentleman in Zambia telling us about the programs, and then Tia with the data has really given me an opportunity to try to put my thoughts together to bring this to you all. I am a descendant of persons who were brought to the United States and enslaved. We are a permanent underclass in the US, and it has been obscured by, in 1965, before that, all the work that Dr. King and my parents, I was growing up then, but not old enough to participate. The civil rights legislation came about, and what it did was it opened the doors to a lot of, I'll call cousins, from around the world that shared skin color. And what has happened is we wound up getting the least of the benefits of the programs and all the new people that came in, going under the Black people, because at the time, when Stokely Carmichael and all of them came up with the Black people, we knew who we were. It was us, and it was my Caucasian brothers and sisters who were working together. The Civil Rights Bill now made it easy for them to come in here because they flooded in. And so the resources did not move us out. The whole purpose was to lift us out of generational poverty. And Dr. King talked about that because in '65, it had been 100 years since emancipation. And even they don't tell you all this, you all stuck on I have a dream. He spoke about why were we still a permanent underclass, and as today we are. And so now you've heard about the reparations movement, that's for us, and the UN has said they should give us reparations. The problem is my cousins who share my skin color and others who are the Black people are fighting against this because if we get reparations, they don't get any, when we trace back to who we are. And the other thing is about the data. I know, that's why I said I don't want to take a lot of time, it's hard to get into this, but we need data. And to show, because disaggregated data to show that we continue to be a permanent poverty group. And you do it well when you look at low-income people in the continent. But this is something I would have to get all of you all to talk about. We have formed a caucus. We were allowed under NGO CSW to form a caucus called Women and Girls, Descendants of Victims or Africans of the Transatlantic Slave Trade. And we are now just getting together and organizing. What we found out is our sisters in Brazil were the largest amount were dropped off. And throughout the Americas and the Caribbean, more so the Americas, because the Caribbeans had independence, they sort of run their countries. But we found that we all share this issue of being sub-poverty people within the culture. And so it's too big of a thing to ask, but I would like an opportunity. We need data, and our sisters in South America, like myself, the governments are doing agenda stuff, but they don't have data to show that we have a double hit. And our government has not been, in general, doing the review reports of what they are doing. If you look, all the other governments are doing that. So I just wanted to open it up and make you aware. And so I would have to get with you all so that it can be presented, how you can help. You're used to doing it. Nobody wants to mess with the US, but I'm sure they're asking to help.
Absolutely, you're right. The United States definitely falls short on monitoring and evaluation measures. Any other questions?
Thank you. My name is Silvana Caputo. I represent the Italian trade unions, Italian workers trade unions. Indeed, the link between social protection and the gender equality is very strong and is essential in the fight against poverty. What we were focusing on is the fact that the political context cannot be neglected, and it is a context of increasing inequalities everywhere. We are greatly concerned looking at the trend within the UN and the CSW of the presence of private funding rather than very few little talk about the necessity, the need of strengthening the public resources. When we talk about schooling, about the health assistance, of housing, of transport, we need a system where we have the equal access for everybody. It is not by chance that today, if we talk about Zambia, I was enormously interested in your speech, but we see that the life expectancy is very low, especially if we compare with Germany or Italy and so on. This is the greatest injustice worldwide, no? Because you give access to somebody if she or he is born in Zambia or in Uganda or in Honduras to live the half of the time of the other people. So there is a strong connection with public access, equal, universal for everybody, and the limitation. No private sector can allow the possibility to everybody to access. And then the content is very different. So it's a political approach which should be considered, and also the political trend worldwide should concern everybody of us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for those wonderful talks. It was really informative. I love learning about the different programs. I want to pick up on something that I think Lauren already highlighted about Mr. Caputo's talk, and that was that it was this incredibly comprehensive and holistic program, and yet granular at the same time. You were really digging into why some kids still couldn't take advantage of the program, which I think is so essential. And one of the things you highlighted was the ongoing school-related sexual violence. And I was just curious to learn more about who the perpetrators were, where this was happening. Is this on the way to school? Because you mentioned building boarding schools and that being a preferential approach. So I was just curious about what you have learned about that and how you're integrating that either with girls or with programming around boys or teachers, because sometimes it's not always the girls who we need to direct these programs to in order to benefit them. I was just curious what you had learned and what your approach was, because I thought that was so interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to pause collecting questions to give everyone an opportunity to answer. We've gotten this far. Who would like to start us off?
Okay, so like I said, there was a study that we conducted between 2018 and 2019, and we discovered that, interestingly, girls were bullying more of each other than the boys did amongst themselves. And there was more violence between a female teacher to a female learner, and less between a male teacher and a female learner. Okay? And so, again, there was a lot of violence happening within the school premises while the girls and boys were in school. Verbal abuse, sexual abuse, and then there was also some form of violence happening in the homes where these girls were coming from, and that affected their performance, concentration in class, and so forth. There was also violence happening, like in the case of the girls who would have to walk long distances to school, so they could be bullied by the boys. Girls could fight amongst themselves, more maybe over a boy or something like that. So it's happening in school, on the way to and from school, and in the homes where these girls are coming from. And that is why our intervention is focusing on the learners themselves. And in this intervention, we've included the boy child. And we formed these SRGBV clubs where we're teaching both the boys and the girls on issues to do with SRGBV. And this is why we are also engaging the teachers and the school administrators. And we've also involved the communities through the parent-teacher committees. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kaputa, and thank you to all of our panelists today. We wish we could sit here for hours taking your questions, but unfortunately we know you all have other appointments. So I want to say a big thank you and a round of applause for our panel. And now I will hand it over to Dr. Oster to close us out.
Can we have another round of applause for our panelists? And apologies, I know we've gone over time, but we're glad for those of you that have held out to the end. And if I saw there were some more questions, maybe you could approach our panelists. But just sort of in reflecting about some of the things that we heard today, I think this is a really, it's clear from the conversation today that there's a lot of evidence supporting this type of approach. And there's also a growing body of practice, which is really encouraging, because not always does the evidence match with the practice. So I think that is an inspiring thing to walk away with, but knowing that we can definitely do more and continue to grow these programs. And I think with the particular lens around adolescence, I was very struck with what Tia said about how, adolescents face some of the most elevated risks. And adolescence is this period of time where we have the potential to break the cycle of intergenerational poverty, and that social protection is a key part of that. Yet they are the ones that are sort of the least exposed to social protection. And so maybe, we can try through our work, whether it's the evidence generation or the practice or the funding, to start to close that gap. I think the other thing that came through really clearly, I think, Lauren, you said this, that cash is significant, but it's not sufficient. So thinking about, I love that frame of social protection as a doorway into many of the issues that adolescents are facing, and how do we take that approach to work in a multidimensional way where we leverage social protection programs to really think about the holistic adolescent and what their needs are. So thank you again to everyone for your insights and for participating and for coming and listening, and wish everyone sort of further successful deliberations at CSW, and hope to see you again and continue to interact. Thank you very much.